I don't know about you, but I have a desperate need to make more sense of what is happening in the world as it relates to the Jewish community in Israel. And I've received several comments this week on my feed. One is, if we can't trust the media, where are we getting our news besides, obviously, people you trust on Instagram? And secondly, people have asked me to make longer form content on these important subjects. So while I am not committing to a show of any kind or a podcast, I have recorded episode 1 of 1 for this Israel Jewish news fake show. And my guest today is extraordinarily qualified to go into these very important subjects. Dr. Eric Mandel is the senior security editor of the Jerusalem Post magazine, the Jerusalem Report, and director of MEPIN, the Middle East Political Information Network. Over the last 25 years, he has briefed members of Congress and their foreign policy aides on both sides of the aisle, been on the front lines of all of Israel's wars since 2001, and met with security, intelligence, and defense officials in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, and the Palestinian Authority. He was the founding chair of StandWithUs in New York and has spoken at many universities, 12 since October 7th. He writes also for The Hill, JNS, and has been published in many other publications. I hope you watch it to the end. He has so much information. Eric, we are recording this on the day of the Bibas funeral, which is heartbreaking. This whole deal, this phase 1, phase 2, the whole entire thing, I hate the deal so much. And what I want to know, and I think a lot of people want to know, is how are we going to actually move forward through this? When does payback come? And how are you feeling about where we are now in the cadence of this process that was originally negotiated by the Biden administration and is now being executed by the Trump administration, and specifically spearheaded by Steve Witkoff? But how are you feeling about all of this?
Uneasy, to say the least. But I will tell you, I think a defining time just occurred with the Bibas atrocities coming out. It was the iconic faces of the hostages. I think it has changed Israel, that they are going to be less accommodating, that it's going to be even more painful to make deals for prisoners with blood on their hands. We know that Hamas is rearming in Gaza. We know they're upping their game in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. So it has not been a good deal as far as I'm concerned. But Israel, in order for them to come together, the Israelis, they have to come together. They need to have unity, where they send their sons and daughters into harm's way, that everybody comes home. And they're in a dilemma. They're in a traumatic stress. How do I bring our hostages home, both civilian and soldiers? And how do I go to what I really need to do, not let there be another October 7th? Hamas has said very clearly, we want another October 7th. We saw their images, what they did during the funerals. So I think the process has been bad. I think what should have been from the very beginning is a deal for 100% of the hostages. Hamas made it very clear, we will not give 100% of the hostages unless there's actually an end of the war. Israel leaves Gaza totally. And then it becomes very difficult to go back. People say, well, it's always easier to go back. Not so easy. And the president really would like a ceasefire to have a victory here. So there are people at contradictory positions of what it is. So Steve Witkoff was supposed to be there today. He has been giving too many portfolios. He actually is the Ukraine portfolio negotiation now. So he's delayed it to possibly next week. Israelis have sent their negotiating teams to both Qatar and to Cairo. And if there's progress, Witkoff will go there on Sunday. But then you're dealing with the Egyptians, who haven't held up their end of the bargain, and the Qataris, who are frenemies to the United States. They, support financially Hamas. They give them sanctuary. They help a lot of Islamists around the world. But they're the best mediators we could have. And we do need them for something. They house our CENTCOM. So you have so many different levels here. It's five-dimensional chess. But getting back to your original question, it is incredibly hard. Israel is at best going to get a few more living hostages out before they're going to have to make a decision to go back into Gaza.
So just regarding Egypt's end of the deal, what have they not lived up to specifically?
Okay, one of the things that's happened right now is they have broken the 1979 treaty. They have moved forces and a strength of forces into the Sinai, which they're not supposed to do. Could this be against Israel? Could it be what I think it is, so there is no forced Palestinians coming out of Gaza because they don't want them, and for good reason. The Palestinians are the Muslim Brotherhood, the Hamas. They've been radicalized, including the civilians. That is the arch enemy of the authoritarians in Egypt. So they have broken that. What else did they break? Think of the border, which is called the Philadelphia Corridor between the Sinai,
Hmm.
either by being inept or being corrupt or being complicit. They gave the source of all the weapons and the
Yeah,
monies
through the tunnels
through
there.
the tunnels. And by the way, most of what went on wasn't even through the tunnels of this small Philadelphia corridor. It went overland through the Rafah crossing. It was payoffs. And so it is not, Egypt has not been a good friend here. The question really is, what really should have happened, Egypt never did what almost every other country has done, including Turkey, which is not one of my favorites. Turkey took in 3 million Syrian refugees in the Civil War. Egyptians didn't take any in of their own brethren, Sunnis, Muslims, Arabs of the same sort, but they wouldn't take them in. And that is what President Trump would like as part of an answer, maybe having the Palestinians come out of Gaza, because it's going to take 15 or 20 years, according to Wickoff, to rebuild, and to give them at a 15, 20-year temporary place to hang their hat, because you cannot rebuild Gaza, no matter who wants, whether the President Trump's plan, the Egyptian plan, nothing could happen as long as Hamas remains there and is embedded in the population. We'll just have October 7th after October 7th again and again.
So, three things that came to mind. So, one is this whole Egypt scenario really why Biden didn't want Netanyahu going into Rafah?
Yeah, I think he was under pressure from the left wing of his party. And I think they really misunderstood what was going on when Vice President Harris said she saw the maps and that Israel couldn't go in. The slowdown that the Biden administration forced on Israel caused more casualties and hurt Israel and made the war last much longer.
Sure.
And the world could weaponize against Israel. I think it was really the president was fighting a tidal wave from his left. And that was one of the things that they stood on. I was there on October 7th. And I remember the conversations. One of the conversations was, why didn't Israel, when it went in 3 weeks after October 7th, why did it just go in the north? Why didn't it start in the Philadelphia corridor and then come up? So there's a lot of things that were going to be reviewed over time. But the last administration was problematic, and some things they should be given great credit for, especially in the beginning of the war. But there was, and I knew this because I was on the front lines in the field talking to the soldiers and officers, there was a slowdown of weapons, and that really definitely hurt Israel's momentum.
When we talk about the Trump administration's idea that the Palestinians be removed from Gaza for the rebuild that you said will last 20 years or so, as far as I've heard, it's not temporary in the sense that there is no right of return. Is that incorrect?
Nobody knows, because basically these are thoughts that have been thrown out. What we do know is before October 7th, at least 40%, and this is before October 7th, at least 40% of Palestinian Gazans wanted to leave. Why would they want to stay there? They would, if they weren't part of Hamas, they weren't surviving and they were oppressed and it was terrible. But they didn't want, and one of the things when you ask them anecdotally, when we hear, it's not that they don't want to leave, they don't want to go to another Arab country. They don't want to go to Egypt. They don't want to go to Jordan. They don't want to go to Libya or Sudan or Somaliland or wherever the president talked. They said they will go if they can go to the Canadas, the Australias, Europeans. I'm not so excited about that, because when the Palestinian diaspora has gone out, we've had some radicalization. We saw it after October 7th.
Well, we still have it. We still have it in those countries.
We definitely have it. By the way, there's a tiny bit of good news, because my mother tells me she doesn't like listening to me or my writing because I depress her. But I will tell you, the Senate Judiciary Committee has now an anti-Semitism seminar they're going to be starting next week.
Great.
is going to be going after Hamas supporters who instigated on campuses. So there actually are things that are happening. The Department of Justice is working on that. And so there are some things that are really finally the things that we let go on college campuses. There is now going to be some fight back through the Department of Justice where they sat on their hands before.
So I don't want to forget my third point, but we're going to come back to this college campus discussion in a second. The Lebanon ceasefire is like almost at a deadline, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're almost there. And then what happens? So I work with a think tank up north. I advise with them, and I'm actually bringing the head of that think tank called Alma to Washington tomorrow and Friday to brief Congress and go to the State Department. And what they have talked about is the Shiitization of the Lebanese armed forces. The demographics of Lebanon, which is another artificially constructed country, have shifted to Shiites, which are now the majority of the Lebanese armed forces that are either intimidated or complicit in working with Hezbollah and the impotent UN forces that are there. And they were getting, before October 7th, $140 million a year. And we pretend that's going to be the answer to get Hezbollah out of at least southern Lebanon. But Israel is seeing all the time that Hezbollah is probing, testing, wanting to come back. And that whole southern area, when the citizens eventually come back, those are Shiites that will give them the benefit of the doubt. Their social services come from Hezbollah. And where does Hezbollah get it from? Money's from Iran.
Yep.
You really want to do something here? It wasn't want to be on the topic. You want regime change in Iran to cut the funneling of all of that would be the best thing that could possibly happen. But nobody wants to say the obvious. We should be pro-Iranian, supporters of the Iranian people. And we've, unfortunately, multiple administrations have not been good on that. But that's really the answer, or the beginning of the answer, to stop the funding of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and popular mobilization units in Iraq and all the nefarious actors.
So yesterday, I saw a lot of clips floating around about this rumor mill that Iran, the Islamic Republic, was bracing for a potential attack on the nuclear facilities by the US and Israel. Who do you think starts that sort of chatter? And is it really just to keep people on their toes? Do you think there's really something brewing there that is imminent? Because I just go back to, the first Trump administration was so effective in really debilitating the Islamic Republic in terms of oil export and the economy. And we understand that the influx of funding has been able to give us, what we see in October 7th and thereafter. So what are your thoughts on what is really happening with the sort of Iran axis of evil group?
Okay. So first of all, last administration, there was sanctions. They didn't enforce the sanctions. They allowed the amount of oil to be at the highest levels, basically going at cheap prices to supposedly our number one nemesis, China.
So this is talking about the Biden administration.
Correct. And then now, so I highly encourage, and hopefully the administration says they're going to do it, is go back to maximum sanctions. There's something passed that we really need to get done before October of this year called snapback sanctions, which are the regional UN sanctions that came when the Iran deal occurred in 2015. And that would really put more pressure, but we need the Europeans to buy into that. And they're claiming they're going to, but they basically do a lot of business with the Iranians. Why did I dream about, that we may be attacked soon? I think that is to create leverage in negotiations that the administration has said that it wants, but it gives contradictory signs. It is said that it's going to have a third ballistic attack against Israel after the first two, which were mainly intercepted. And they refused, as of yesterday, they will not have direct negotiations with the United States. So they're creating bargaining chips to give up, to continue to buy more time. I've been very clear, and I'm not a war hawk, but this is a window of opportunity with Israel taking down the defense array that they have to weaken, it may not be destroy, but weaken the Iranian nuclear facilities that are there and that are spread out.
So, oh, sorry, go on.
Can Israel do it by itself? That's a big question. Now, maybe President Trump will help Israel do it. Maybe the quid pro quo is to have a prolonged ceasefire in Gaza, and the payback would be that we will help you on Iran. Iran is still the number one problem for Israel in the Middle East. That if you not only put snapback sanctions and enforce the sanctions and target their nuclear facilities, everything gets better. The possibility of Israeli-Saudi normalization becomes better because
for sure.
You don't want to miss this window of opportunity. So the Iranians are smart. They think they can play the Americans. And because they really did play the Americans, I had a front row seat to this in the Senate in 2013, 14, and 15, how we were manipulated by the Iranians. I mean, we gave the world's leading state sponsor of terror the right to enrich uranium. We don't give that to democracies nowadays. So
in 2013, we did that.
Yeah, well, actually, it was both in UN.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Yes, Obama's administration did this.
Obama administration, yeah. I keep going back, but these things, they build upon one another.
Yeah.
And so we should be going back to saying we don't give you the right to enrich uranium, and because I will say these are ideologically motivated people in a jihadist mentality, and theirs is Shiite jihadism as opposed to the Sunni jihadism of the Al-Qaedas and ISIS and Hamas of the world. And they do share some things. And the question is, can a president who's a transactional president who's done amazing real estate deals, he's putting in somebody like Steve Witkoff to go in and act like he does in real estate deals, but can you negotiate with jihadists?
No, I don't think you can. Yeah. But okay, I think there's a big frustration for a lot of people in hearing Trump say, release all the hostages or they'll be hell to pay, or, oh, yeah, I told Netanyahu he can do whatever he wants. So he's basically essentially the opposite of Biden, right? It's like handcuffs are off, you do you, Israel. And then everyone's looking at Israel and Netanyahu being like, okay, so what are you going to do? Like, where it's like we all campaigned and ranted and vented for years in terms of let Israel do what they need to do. So now you have Trump saying that, and Israel's kind of just not doing anything. And I understand we need to get the hostages out, but at what point do we say, and again, if it were my kid who was being held, I understand that I would have a different mentality. At what point do we say this window that you just spoke of has a limited timestamp on it to actually really be provocative? And is it the hostages? How many hostages are even alive? Like, how many hostages are we actually even sacrificing versus how many Israeli soldiers we're sacrificing by, I know it's very complex. I'm making it sound simple, but when is Israel going to get aggressive?
So you asked me how many hostages. So I heard as of yesterday, they believe 22 are alive after this phase. So if they can have a phase A1B of what's going on, then maybe they're hoping for 5 or 10 more. Then they don't believe they're going to get all of them out. So let's be clear. But you were talking about how many Israeli soldiers are going to die. Forget about Israeli soldiers, which is horrific because they're signing up, if you will. How many Israeli civilians are going to die in terrorism? Israel made a profound mistake in allowing to give up the Netzarim crossing, which crossed east-west to the Mediterranean to Israel, so people can go from the south back to the north. Now you have hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the north, in areas that have been devastated, at least according to the UN, which I don't trust the statistics, but it could be true. Yeah. 70% of the houses have been destroyed. These are all the ones, this area is next to the vast majority of the kibbutzim. Israel's going to have to clean that area out again. So how many soldiers are going to die there? To get the people to go to the south, the world will be outraged. And then you have Hamas has come back and rebuilt. They've been revitalized during this ceasefire time. So when will Israel go in and do what it does? I'll be even a little more cynical. Bibi has to think about his next election. He's a politician. If he knows that he's not prioritizing the hostages at this point in time, because he thinks he may have lost maybe the hard right, and he may have lost the ultra-Orthodox because he doesn't want to necessarily give them exemptions because they have been absent in as part of the Israeli army. We're not talking about religious Zionists who are, from Judea and Samaria and Israel itself. But he is thinking about the next election, and he, I think, believes that he has to appear to do everything he can to get the hostages back. But the Israeli people, when I talk to the soldiers in the field, they feel they have failed because not only the soldiers were taken, but the civilians were taken, and that it is going to be a trauma on this country for a very long time. And when you go back in, how do you accomplish this? So I've written for a long time saying everybody thinks they're going to go back in and it's going to be weeks and months. This is going to go on for years. Think of Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. Israel goes in every single night, even before October 7th, to extract terrorists, but it keeps it from bubbling over. By the way, that's the next hot area I've been embedded with troops that are there. You have to think of Gaza, if you're not going to move the population out, like the West Bank, and you're going to have to go in, and then the leash you're going to be given is long. Trump administration would do that. What would be after the Trump administration? But this is the beginning of the Trump administration. So you want to do as much as you can that you could do there. If you keep the status quo, it's not going to be pretty. Israel doesn't want to reoccupy it. There's now an Egyptian plan. They're meeting the Arab League next week. It's all going to be more of the same. You had Lapid come out yesterday saying, tell Egypt to take over Gaza. Yeah, the Egyptians want to take over Gaza. They gave it up and they were happy to have lost it in 67. So, what's going to happen? Is the Trump plan dead? No, I think, there should be a lot of carrots to Egypt to create a city that can take 1 million people in and that you can house them there. And then and other Palestinians to go to other places and to depopulate it, because you're going to only be able to go in there and rebuild it if there's no Hamas and basically no population there, because it's going to be a construction project for many years. And Biden was not fair what he had said when he said this is going to be a 3 to 5 year project. I trust the developers here more, but of what's there. And by the way, beyond the demolition zone, there is a tunnel network still there. There could be tens upon tens of miles of multi-layered tunnels that they're still in, and now they're rebuilding them, the Israeli intelligence believes. So I don't mean to be, you're saying, when are we going to go on the offensive? You have to have a vision of what you want. And the hostage part is taking Israel and it's strangling it. And that is taking a life of its own that you're not doing when it's won. The first week, what I had said was, and what some Israeli intelligence people told me when I was there in October 7th, and the week after, I was on television and talking all the time, they said, you have to assume all the hostages, and at that point, it was 240 or 50 hostages were there, that they're all dead, and we have to do militarily what we need to do. But that changed, especially with the Biden slowdown, as the weeks and months went on, and the psychological terror that Hamas put on the Israeli public. It's gotten them to the place they're in now. Israel has won tactical victories over Hamas, over Hezbollah, over maybe the Houthis. I mean, there's tactical victories, but it hasn't won the big strategic victory yet, including with Iran.
So let's shift our focus a little bit over back to Qatar, where we understand where they sit in the hostage mediation for the negotiations, but there's a lot of rumors regarding Qatar's influence also on the hostage families and the sort of politically charged situation in Israel regarding people who want to sort of get the hostages out versus people who want to move forward militarily. Do you have any insights into that? Is that based on any truth?
So I've been to Doha. I was actually invited to go in October 2023 with the Qatari ambassador to Gaza, and I accepted. Thank God it didn't happen.
Well,
Um, so Qatar is an interesting player. It's a frenemy. They're the largest funder of American university, foreign funder of American universities.
yep, which I was going to get to, but yep.
And that is a disaster. Yet they try to play that they're Switzerland. They talk to everybody. The Qataris told me if they want this, they told me this before October 7th. If America wants them to throw Hamas out or the other Islamic groups that they give sanctuary to, they would. But they were told that the Americans, they told me the Americans didn't want him to leave. They told me Mossad was regularly visiting, which turned out to be true. So Qatar basically at the end of this wants to come out smelling like a rose. We have to have a time where we pause a second and we say, Qatar, you're going to have to choose sides here.
Yeah.
We know that you share the world's largest gas field in the world with Iran. So you got to be okay with them, at least business-wise. But you cannot be giving sanctuary to the Al Qaeda types and every other jihadist group in the world and funding them.
But what leverage do we have in terms of our own military base there? That's the largest one, right? So we need that too.
Yes and no. Okay. So it's called Al Uaid. CENTCOM is there. They spent a lot of money, Qataris, to buy us off to be there. And they like it also because it protects them from Iran. They fear Iran also. So I said to the Qataris, hey, there's actually something in Congress. There is, but it's on kind of mothballed, that the Emiratis are willing to build us a base just as big as your base. And wouldn't that be great? And they kind of went, Grace, we just put $1 billion in there and whatever it is. They think they have us over a barrel with it. And we cannot let them have us over a barrel with it. It's a very vital strategic place that it is, but it is something that is possibly replaceable over time. And if we give enough signals, then we will have a situation where maybe they can be more compliant. Listen, they control Al Jazeera television. I met with the managing editor in Doha there. This is a place, forgetting about anti-Semitism, this is a place of anti-Americanism where it's spreading a hateful message about us to hundreds of millions of people every single day. We should be putting pressure on Qatar. Listen, the Saudis and the Emiratis all boycotted them and put a blockade in a bunch of years ago, and we didn't back it up because lots of people make a lot of money, America, with the Qataris.
No, this is a huge problem, which brings me to my post from yesterday on Northwestern University, who has accepted $1 billion in funding from Qatar since 2007, where now they're instituting this mandatory anti-discrimination training for students and faculty across all departments. It's a 20-minute video within a 3-hour online course that is completely using unverified data from CARE about Muslim hate crimes. But for the Jewish hate crimes, they're using verified FBI data. And they're slanting it so it looks like Islamophobia on campus is a real thing, when in actuality, it's anti-Semitism on campus that's a real thing. So how do we get the Trump administration to stop allowing this foreign money to go to our academic institutions, which are not just on the college campuses? It goes straight up from kindergarten.
Right. So that's, I spent time, I was the original chair for 10 years at StandWithUs in the Northeast. And I saw all the stuff going on, that we were fighting in colleges, going back 20 years, and then we were fighting in high schools. And
it makes me sad, Eric.
We're now in elementary schools that's going on. For your listeners, if they don't know what CARE is, it's Council for American Islamic Relations, and they were basically complicit, going back to the Holy Land Foundation, people associated with them, to things that were supporters of Hamas going back to the late 2000s. So, what can we do? It's going to take leadership. We're seeing it already from the DOJ, that we've seen that they're having investigations going on. There are so many things the administration needs to do. It needs to prioritize it. So the Senate is stepping up. Judiciary Chairman Grassley is stepping up. On the House, they're stepping up. There are Democrats who are joining some of these things. Religious hate crimes, which you were alluding to before, when you were talking about Islamophobia, pre-October 7th, before this, and obviously it's much worse now, 60% or so of religious-based hate crimes were against Jews.
Right.
And people were ignoring it. And then you had, in this past fall, you had Senator Durbin, when they were asking for an anti-Semitism committee hearing in the Senate, he wouldn't do one. He did one on all religious hate. It's all religious hate matters kind of thing. And so we're getting now, we have people, however you feel, from a Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. But right now you have a Congress and you have a president and people there who are interested.
Sorry, 1 second. Let me just get rid of this. Go on.
Who are interested. The question is, where are they going to put their bandwidth? And we're hoping that they're going to do this. One of these layers goes on another. It's a lot of this was the DEI stuff. DEI became one of the leaders of anti-Semitism, as part of what was going on. Jews were white persecutors and going on, and stuff was insanity. We supported colonization, which is the exact opposite. It's like you say a lie strong enough and often enough, it becomes a truth.
Yes.
That's what we were dealing with. But now it seems that the tide is turning. But are they going to put all their resources into it? That's what I think the American Jewish community, Democrat or Republican, needs to put pressure. And one of the things that didn't happen, that may happen now, was the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which codified the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, which basically said, yes, you are an anti-Semite if you say Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state. You call them Nazis. You have a standard against them that you don't have against any other nation. Yeah, you're an anti-Semite. And unfortunately, when the Senate was controlled by Senator Schumer, he refused because of pressure from the left to do that. Right now, he seems to be getting on board with this.
Yeah, well, why? Because his book on anti-Semitism in America is coming out in March.
Right. So it's, whatever it is, better late than never. But if we're going to fight anti-Semitism, we have to have a definition. Not perfect, but it is not taking away people's freedom of speech. It is not saying you can't be an anti-Semite. You're not going to be persecuted for it. But if you use your anti-Semitism and you use it as part of a curriculum, then there must be consequences. And if you have a definition, you're in much better shape. If you have no definition, you have no chance. Absolutely.
Last thought, because we do need to wrap, but last thought in terms of there's a new site up called UPenn Papers, which is profiling all of the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel professors on UPenn's campus. And one of the things, I was talking to someone yesterday, and one of the things that come up is, well, of course you have your free speech, but then you also have your tenure topic. And at what point do we say, hey, if you're an educator and you are publicly praising a terrorist organization, that is not free speech. That is now in breach of what I would think would be an educational morality clause, if there was one in a contract, that goes beyond sort of the parameters of tenure. Because what we're seeing right now is like between these radical educators and the radical media, like Mehdi Hasan, for example, some of the language that everyone's leaning on free speech is actually, it's anti-Western language. Forget about Israel, forget about Jews, it is anti-American language. At a certain point, when do we say enough is enough?
We are on a slippery slope here. First of all, I was speaking at Wesleyan about a year or so ago, and I used something about Western. And one of the students later came and says, if you want the students to listen to you, don't use the word Western, because we've been taught and we believe that anything Western civilization has done more harm in the world than good. So I'm not making this up. And I actually sort of took out the word Western when I speak at universities, so I'm not prejudged of what it is.
Smart move. I mean, okay, I can't deal with all this PC shit, but fine. Anti-American. How's that?
Okay, so the question really is here, making the connection between saying I support a terrorist group, because they're usually pretty cagey about how they're handling it.
Some of them are not pretty cagey. Some of them are pretty outright.
They're pretty outright. And if they're tenured, the university, which has administrators that basically either are cowardly, which is what we saw when you were talking about Virginia Fox and the hearings, we saw that with the president, or intimidated, are not willing to fight against it. You could take a tenured professor and say, okay, we're not going to give you any classes to teach. I mean, there are things you could do. The best thing you could do is if the federal government says that if a university, if you have a standard from IHRH and becomes a federal standard of anti-Semitism, and tenured professors do that funding to their departments, or any, not just that professor, but any of the departments, we will cut off. And if they don't stop it, we will cut off the sections of the university, including things that are, by the way, it is where you have this anti-Semitism and basically DEI still going. There's a great piece by Jason Riley today in the Wall Street Journal, in the accreditation committees, forcing basically reverse discrimination in order to be accredited. There were so many layers here, but the one power, and we saw it with Ackman when he, cut funding to universities he gave money to. I think Kraft did it also. Money is the thing. And who has the most money and what they rely on? It's the federal government. Harvard has an endowment that is ridiculous, but they don't use their endowment. They use monies from the federal government. They don't want to use it. That is the power, and that is really where President Trump hopefully will tell his cabinet people, his DOJ, that we, and it's now McMahon being the Secretary of Education, this is our priority. That, but you need that IHRA definition first, go after them, and follow the money. The money will put pressure on them to change. You see things changing, but they're basically resisting, they're being soft, they're changing some language, especially about DEI, but the anti-Semitism stuff. But they're ready to go back quickly in the other direction. You need to have things that are permanent and have consequences. And freedom of speech, you don't have, the classic thing, you can't scream, fire in a movie theater of what it is. Making that for people who are, supporters of what we consider American designated terrorist groups. Where does that say that I'm giving true support, that you've become, if you will, a traitor to the United States? Yeah. But, we look on the flip side, you look at, Elon Musk was speaking in Germany and was talking about, you guys suppress speech too much, so, it goes both ways here. But I think we need to rein in speech that affects our young people. I think that is the major focus here. You're not going to change media unless they don't get viewers. So what's happening with MSNBC? They are changing because they lost 50% of their viewership. Yeah. But the federal government is the answer. Definition of anti-Semitism is the answer. And the American Jewish community will hopefully remain together. When this war gets quieter and things tie down, I hope American Jewry doesn't forget October 7th and what happened before Israel even went back in. Anti-Semitism was crazy in the world. But by the way, 60% of anti-Semitic, of anti-Israel protests occurred within a couple of days, were anti-Israel within a couple of days, October 7th. After 3 weeks, it was 90% of the protests in the world were anti-Israel, mainly anti-Jewish. And you'll say, well, isn't there a big difference between Jewish and Israel? When you go to the Middle East, they don't call them Israelis, they call them Jews. And that is just the fact of what it is. So we want American Jews in the diaspora, I'm an American Jew, to remember this, that, we have to fight for our rights. And anti-Semitism is something that we can't just look past because we're doing well financially or our kids are getting into the right schools. Things will fall down very quickly. And we saw how quickly it almost happened after October 7th. We can't, one, shame on you, twice, shame on me. American Jewish community got to stand together, not just this year and next year, but for decades to come.
Yeah. Well, on that note, to be continued. Eric, this was fascinating, as I knew it would be. Thanks for taking the time to have the discussion.
And thank you for everything you do. You do great work.
You do great work too. Mutual.